What is up everyone, Nick here, and I have something very exciting for you guys. This video that you're watching right now marks the very beginning in a series of update videos where I cover the progress of making my very new Iron Man suit, the Mark 46 from Civil War. And in this video, we're mostly going to be focusing on the electronics and the assembly of my Unibeam. But before we get to that, I would like to cover all the progress I've already done so far, and I would also like to explain my sort of process when it comes to making Iron Man suits. So before I cover the legs in detail, I just want to go over some of the parts I've already 3D printed. So for starters, I have the helmet 3D printed. This is Levy 3D's Mark 46 files. Besides this, I also have some of the chest printed out, some of the chest panels, and I also have a single shoulder printed out. The rest of the work I've been doing on this suit has just been the legs. So let me explain to you why and how that kind of flows into my planning process. Now, whenever I build anything, whether it's a small prop or a very large cosplay, there's always a very elaborate planning process that I go through. So of course, the very first thing that happens is an idea. What I want to make. And then once I know what I want to make, I start scoping out files to actually 3D print it. Because contrary to popular belief, Do 3D is not the be-all end-all when it comes to 3D files. Who would have thunk? So in this instance, Mark 46 suit files are kind of limited. There's either Do 3D or there's Johan 3D Printmaster. So of course, I went with Johan's files. Now before I do any sort of modifications to the files, I first have to make sure that they actually will fit me. So this is a combination of printing out test rings, of making measurements, and of comparing the current files to other files I've already built, like the Mark 20 suit, for example. I already know how it fits, I already know the scaling of it, so I can compare both files together simultaneously to know how I should scale the Mark 46. So if you're curious on how to get the scaling of your 3D printed files for cosplay just right, I actually made a video where I cover this. It's part 1 of the Mark 42 helmet series. Now, once I get the scaling right, what I actually end up doing with the files depends on my goals. For example, for the Mark 46, I wanted to improve on the mobility that I did with the Mark 20. The Mark 20 has quite a bit of mobility in certain areas. For example, the biceps are jointed, which allows me to touch my head and even take off my helmet, but the legs and the lower body on my suit are super limiting, and it's really difficult to go upstairs. I can walk really well, I can like speed walk in it, but I can't lift my knees really that high. So the very first thing I did is started prototyping the legs. A lot of the inspiration for the mobility in my new suit actually came from Iron Man Hot Toys figures of all things. For example, the moving thigh plate of the Mark 45 Hot Toys figure. So if you want more mobility in the hip of the figure, you actually move the thigh plate along and it gives you more space. So I imported the thigh into Blender and I basically followed Kiara's Workshop's tutorial on modifying files in Blender. So I sliced the quad right off the leg and then spent way too much filament printing this leg prototype. This isn't even the final leg that I'm going to be using in my suit. This is purely a prototype to test out different things for mobility. And I even have a box full of different hinges and like weird doodads and doohickeys I prototyped to get the knee to bend properly that I just ended up wasting because it didn't actually work. But to be fair, that is the name of the game when you're gonna try new stuff. You're gonna make errors, and that's okay. You just have to be ready to waste filament, and even then, it isn't a waste if it's experience. I basically just found out that there are a lot of ways not to hinge the knees on this suit. And all of this prototyping for the suit would not be possible without Sunlu. Sunlu actually provided 15 rolls of their PLA Plus for me to use for this suit, and honestly, I can't thank them enough. The quality of Sunlu's PLA Plus filament is kind of incredible. For example, this helmet was completely printed in Sunlu's PLA Plus, and the dome just came out incredible. It's flawless. The layer lines are barely visible. This dome is gonna take no time to sand whatsoever, and honestly, with such a big project, that's a must. Because I'm starting to run out of time, and the better I can get my prints to come out, the less time I have to spend sanding, and the more time that's gonna give me to actually build this thing. So thank you very much to Sunlu for providing the filament. You guys are incredible. And with that said, let's break down how the leg actually works. So if we take a look inside the leg, you'll see there's a giant raft right there. And you'll see there's some screws sticking right out. That's because the screws screw into this linear rail. This is what guides this piece along the thigh like this. And on the raft, there's an elastic, and that glues to the quad, and that's what allows it to spring back into place. And you might notice there's like this long black piece here. This is printed in TPU, and this screws into this block right here, which is fused to the quad. And then these two here and down here, those aren't screwed into anything, that's glued to the knee, and that's what allows the knee to move around. And then if we take a look at the shin, there's a fourth one here. This one is glued into place, and that last one down there just allows the TPU insert to move around. And then at the very end of the TPU insert, there's an elastic which also pulls it back into position. So on either side of the knee, I have these double hinges, which I 3D printed and designed myself. So there are mounts inside the shin and inside the quad, and they screw into them. And then once they're screwed into position, I can heat these brackets and form them into the shape they're supposed to be. That way they're properly aligned with my knee. So you have one bracket on either side, and then you have these two little pieces here, and it's all attached together using Chicago screws. I'll leave a link in the description to the Thingiverse page for these hinges, and I'll also leave a link for these Chicago screws on Amazon. And once that's said and done, the range of motion in the knee is quite impressive. Like, that's a full knee bend. And what I'm a big fan of, the knee always takes its original position. And you might have also noticed on the back of my shin, there's a giant hole where the calf would be. Originally, I was gonna have this hinge so that it would move out of the way to give me more articulation. But once I actually started testing it, it didn't give me all that much more motion, and it was just a hassle more than anything else. So I decided to scrap that with the final version. So moving on from the leg, now let me briefly cover the shoes. If you've seen my videos breaking down the Mark 20 suit, this is basically the exact same process I took with those shoes, except way better. The first thing I did was I sliced the bottom off so that I could actually put this over a shoe, and then I sized it to whatever sneakers I was gonna use. But here's where it gets interesting. So the sneakers I ended up going with have a 2-inch heel at the back, and they're also slip-ons, meaning there's no laces or anything. And there's this weird elastic at the front that doesn't really do anything. So what I ended up doing is designing a mount that slides under the elastic and has screw holes in it. That way it can screw into the shoe itself. So right now there's no extra elastics holding this onto the sneaker. It's literally bolted into that 3D print that's under the elastic. So you might have already noticed, but I decided to slice off the toes from the boot itself. That way I could design a hinge into it. That way whenever I'm walking, the toe bends with my actual shoe. The only thing I have left to do here is add some elastics. That way it snaps back into place. Right now it's kind of floppy. So now that we've talked about the legs, we can finally get to the chest. So again, going back to my planning process, when you get Johann's files, the chest actually comes separate from the torso and it has inner details. But the thing is, there's no proper way of mounting the chest in place just with Johann's files. You have to figure that for yourself. So you can either design mounts so that you can permanently screw it in place or glue it in place, or you can have hinges in place. That way the whole chest can hinge upwards, kind of like what KA Cosplay and Emily the Engineer did with their suits. However, I stumbled across a couple of Hot Toys figures that have an exploded view of the armor where you can see the inner details. So I decided, hey, why don't I motorize the chest plate? That way a bunch of segments can open up to reveal the inner detail. Now I could have done this on my own, it just would have been jank as hell. So I decided to go to an expert. So I commissioned my friend Levy3D to modify Johann's files to have them be motorized. So the top panel is motorized. The bottom panel is motorized. The side panels, it won't open. There we go. There's a missing hinge here, don't worry about it. It's not supposed to be this jank. I just forgot to install a hinge, don't worry about it. So yeah, this whole thing is motorized. Now what does this have to do with the Unibeam? If I'm gonna have the chest open up like this and expose all the inner details and expose the Unibeam to people, why don't I just make the Unibeam removable too? So that is precisely what we're gonna do today. So once I had the idea that I was gonna make the Unibeam removable, now I had to do all this research to figure out how I'm gonna do that. So there are two things that really set the stage for what we're gonna do today and pushed me towards actually making the Unibeam removable. The first one would be these magnetic pogo connectors. So not only are these super strong, but since they're circular, that means no matter which position I put the magnet in, the charge is still gonna flow through these connectors. And the second thing would be Neon Robotnik's Unibeam files. The design is pretty cool because it's only really two pieces, four if you count these outer details. You basically have this outer casing where you can put all your electronics inside, and then you have this clear bit, which is your Unibeam. However, I wanted a sense of realism when it came to this project, so I figured, why not make the outer casing out of metal? Oh yeah, this thing is printed in SLS aluminum, solid as a rock, and I spent quite a bit of time sanding and polishing this to get a nice reflective finish on it. And I would have never been able to get my hands on something like this if it weren't for this channel sponsor, PCBWAY. PCBWAY is the industry leader when it comes to high quality PCB manufacturing and 3D printing solutions. They offer unparalleled quality, fast turnaround times, and competitive pricing. A casing like this only costs about $50, and it can be produced and delivered to you within a week depending on your choice of shipping. So again, a big thank you to PCBWAY for sponsoring this channel. Now, before I ordered this casing from PCBWAY, I had to do a few modifications to the 3D file. So for starters, I had to scale this down to 80%, that way it would fit in the chest cavity. And next up, I had to increase the diameter of this hole back here so that it would fit the magnetic pogo connector. But once that was settled, I uploaded the STL file to PCBWAY's website and I ordered it immediately. And then I went ahead and resin printed this clear part and some of the inner details, and I painted these details a flat black. And once that was dry, I added a coat of aqua gloss clear to get a nice shiny finish on them. And once that was cured, I added a nice coat of Duralumen tough to get this nice shiny finish. But we are still not done with the design work. I still had to figure out how I was actually going to mount the electronics inside this thing, and I also had to figure out how I was going to mount the Unibeam in place. So here are some mounts I designed in 3D Builder. These are pretty easy to make. All you need is a good set of calipers and a lot of patience. And honestly, you don't even really need these. I just wanted the internals of my Unibeam to be neatly fitted. And basically, I would just use the casing as a negative. I would place whatever part inside of it, I would hit the subtract tool, and it would delete everything around this part, making a nice little piece that can fit inside the Unibeam. And then I just shrunk this down by 1% to make sure it wouldn't be too tight inside the casing, and I started editing it, making slots for all my electronics and making a slot for the pogo connector. And since I don't have a custom NeoPixel grid to fit inside this thing, I overlapped an 18 light ring over a 12 light ring and made these cute little mounts here so that they would be perfectly fitted on top of each other. And I also have this NeoPixel jewel with I no longer have this NeoPixel jewel, which is gonna get glued in the center of this. So this piece fits in here just like that. And then this NeoPixel ring fits right over that. And then the clear piece goes over that. Honestly, the trickiest part of all this was figuring out how to mount the Unibeam inside my chest and to make sure that the pogo pins would stay aligned and connected at all times. So what I ended up doing was making these rings inside the mount that would slot perfectly with the rings on the outside of the casing. That way it can basically hold it upright without any effort whatsoever. So once the magnets are installed, this should hold perfectly upright like this. Okay, so we have all of our 3D printed parts. Now it's finally time for me to start talking about the electronics. And keen-eyed viewers might have already noticed, but this mount for the boards, plural, isn't just for one board, it's for two boards. And that would be because there's an ATtiny85 board inside doing most of the work, and I also have a Wemos D1 Mini, which is working wirelessly with my suit. Oh yeah, this arc reactor communicates wirelessly with the soundboard that's going to be installed in my suit. Meaning when you plug the arc reactor back inside my chest, not only is the light gonna come on, but a sound effect is going to be triggered as it lights up. And for the sound itself, I'm using an Adafruit FX board. So basically the way this works is, the ATtiny85 board boots up, it turns on, it got power. And as it boots up, it sends a signal to the master control board. So this one is going to communicate with the slave control board, and this slave control board is going to activate the switch on the Adafruit FX board. So this one turns on, it blinks, sends a message to here, it blinks, turns on the sound. Now the Wemos D1 Mini, which you can get from PCBWAY.com, works off an ESP8266 board, which is a low-cost Wi-Fi microchip. Unfortunately, I won't be covering the soldering and the coding today for these ESP boards, but we will be going over this in full detail in a dedicated tutorial video where I cover how to make this and how to wirelessly control a helmet. But in the meantime, I will be linking a few blog posts and the video I originally found, which led me to the code I used to make this whole system work. So with that said, let me get to soldering these NeoPixels and assembling all this and seeing if it works. And now that the Unibeam is fully assembled, there's actually quite a bit of heft to this. I just put it on the scale and it weighs just over 100 grams, so yeah, not light. So now I'm gonna grab the chest and glue this in, and we're just gonna see how it looks. This is not the cleanest gluing, but it's fine because I need to rip this out after anyways. Okay, so let me just throw this in. That closes alone. That should turn on. Yeah. And then when the chest opens back up, I can just plug this right out. What more can I say? It's just cool. I'll do it one more time for you guys from up close. That goes right in there. That closes. There we go. Oh, that's so freaking cool. There we go, and it just plugs right out, just like that. And that's going to be it for today's video. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments down below. If you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next one.